Now, I'm joined in studio right now by Arsen Ostrovsky, attorney and CEO for the International Legal Forum. Arsen, as we're sitting here, red alert sirens continuing to blare throughout Israel. However, when we look at these scenes happening abroad, we're hearing from many Jewish people it almost feels safer to be in Israel in an active war zone than it does to be abroad.
I think we're seeing this war now being fought on two fronts here in Israel and Gaza. That's being waged directly against the Hamas terrorists, and we're now seeing it being waged also on campuses in America, on the streets of Europe, and as you saw also on the streets of Russia as well, where the Hamas supporters, enablers are out there. They're not merely protesting, but they're actually calling for blood. What we saw in Russia can only be described as an attempted state-sponsored pogrom. What we're seeing on the campuses, whether it's Columbia, Harvard, we're seeing students, including support from faculty, showing support for Hamas, calling for resistance, calling for another intifada. This is utter Jew hatred, this is incitement to violence, and it is putting Jewish students and faculty and members of the community really at grave risk.
When we talk about mainly the two main instances that are really taking the news headlines right now, you have one in Russia, and then you have what's happening in America. But as you said, Russia, it's almost like a state-sponsored pogrom, versus the United States is supposed to be a safe haven. It's supposed to be tolerant for minority groups, a place where everyone should feel safe. Yet the Jewish people do not feel safe.
The Jewish students do not feel safe. They feel hounded. They feel like they have to hide their very identity, who they are as Jews, as Zionists. This is taking also some really perverted interpretation of free speech, where in America supposedly anything goes, including racial hatred and including incitement, but that is not the case. The universities cannot just use the First Amendment get-out-of-jail card. They have responsibilities, they have obligations under the federal law, including under the Civil Rights Act, to ensure that students are not, Jewish students specifically as well, are not faced with such hostile environments. That speech discriminating and targeting members of the Jewish community is not used on campus, and that the university leadership must act. They cannot just say, well, this is free speech and anything goes. They have to show leadership. They have to show unequivocal condemnation of the attacks on their Jewish students, and they have to take action against the perpetrators that are calling and expressing these acts of violence and incitement, both within both within other student groups, but also importantly within faculty. That is giving them this kind of really unacceptable support as well.
How is this still happening right now? You talk about the difference between free speech and hate speech. How are these protesters now turning violent protesters? We're seeing some handful of people arrested here and there, but for the main part, they're allowed to keep going on.
Partly because I think universities have really turned a blind eye to anti-Semitism, specifically under the guise of anti-Zionism for universities, and we've seen that for the last number of years, where they say, look, maybe we don't like it, but it's free speech. Or when they say, for example, in cases like UC Berkeley, well, look, this is merely against Zionism, and Zionism is just merely a political expression of speech, not something that is inherent, indispensable, and integral to our core Jewish identity. So for many years, university leadership and administrators have really turned a blind eye, and worse yet, have excused, in some cases, tried to justify this all in the name of free speech. And we've now seen what happens when you turn a blind eye to this kind of hatred masquerading as anti-Zionism. It comes to the boil, it comes to the fore, and you're seeing full, really unhinged calls for violence and incitement on the streets, on the campuses of the top universities in America.
And it seems like there's a disconnect almost between the top university leaders and the actual United States leaders, because U.S. President Joe Biden has been one of the very vocal supporters of Israel right now, very vocally speaking out against anti-Semitism, standing with Israel in their main goal of eliminating Hamas right now. But that same rhetoric does not seem to be trickling down to some of these college campuses or the public opinion in general.
Look, you're right, and I think it's important to really reiterate that through the American political echelon, really on a bipartisan level from the president and to both parties, there's been almost universal unequivocal condemnation of what is happening on campus, and really quite, so I suppose, abhorrence in terms of that this is happening in America in 2023. We've also seen legislation that has now been proposed to to take funding away from these universities that actually foment and support and refuse to take action against the anti-Semitism on their campus. We've seen also, the application of Civil Rights Act, something that our organisation, International Legal Forum, has been involved in trying to apply that to universities on campus to ensure that students are supported, that they know that they do have legal rights, and the universities cannot just wash their hands away and say, well, this is free speech. It doesn't work that way. It's not merely free speech, but it's basic discrimination. And it's putting Jewish students, campus officials and Jewish staff and community really under incredible assault, and we have to tell university leadership enough is enough.
What are some of the legal rights of students right now? If you find yourself a student on a college campus, what can you do, and how should you proceed if some of these attacks are taking place?
Look, I think first and foremost, you do need to go to the university leadership because they must act. Even if this does fall within the realm of free speech, and there are some obviously very extreme boundaries, the university still has an obligation to condemn what is happening, to express their support and solidarity with the Jewish students, to give them the tools and the support that they need. I think that's critical. The students do have rights under the Civil Rights Act, which does say that if you are a recipient of federal funding, as just about every university in the United States is to varying levels, then you cannot discriminate on the basis of race, national origin, or shared ancestry. We also have to remember that universities are also have a tax-exempt status as well. Now, they're allowed to fundraise, in some cases, billions upon billions of dollars. And if these universities are engaging in this kind of blatant politics, which might also be in breach of their legal obligations to refrain from doing so under their tax-exempt status, including supporting boycotts, including calling for intifada and violence and so on, then that tax status can also potentially be revoked. So we're trying to look at all those different, I suppose, facets and more. But students need to understand that they are not alone, and the universities must act to stamp out this hatred.
We'll continue to keep an eye on it, as hopefully some of these scenes, people do continue to speak out against it. Arsen Ostrovsky, thank you so much for joining us and giving your insight into what's happening in the United States right now.